In the pandemonium of image, I present you with the universal blue. Blue, an open door to soul, an infinite possibility becoming tangible.
We fall asleep to a soundtrack. We're told time and again how bad that is for us. Too much screen time and blue light are frying our brains, keeping us up all night. All the same, we find ourselves drifting off YouTube or a podcast, one of a dozen redundant streaming services droning on in the dark. Ain't a new habit. When I was little, I would stay up into the early hours more often than not. Only the flicker of an old tube TV and the hum of a VCR for company. And if you were like me, you probably remember how it feels to blink in and out of the waking world, the line between static and videotape and your own muddled thoughts becoming indistinguishable. That's the vibe Skinamarink is going for, and it's what I mean by the title of this video, Every Child's Nightmare. Not because it speaks to any innate human truth or intrinsic fears or whatever. No, I mean the film literally depicts the nightmares so many insomniac kids would have in them fleeting moments of sleep over long nights. And it's an unqualified success. Plenty of horror flicks get called surreal or dreamlike. The first Phantasm film, Jacob's Ladder. Either version of Suspiria. This canon of nightmarish films is well established. But Skinamarink may be the first to recreate the feeling of being present in a literal nightmare as it plays out. At the same time, it will go down as one of the most divisive films in recent memory. You will either love this film or despise it. The plot will be the biggest hurdle for most, as there ain't a conventional plot to speak of. It's better said that Skinamarink suggests a scenario, if you will. A title card tells us the year is 1995, as two small children awake in the middle of the night to discover that their parents are missing. Along with their folks, every exterior door and window in the home has vanished as well. They're trapped inside as an ominous presence lurks, ever just out of sight. That would be a strong enough setup to a conventional horror flick, but the setup is more or less all the audience gets. There are a few errant bits of dialogue here or there that suggest a broader story, but Skinamarink isn't interested in expounding on any of the suggestions it makes. It's not that kind of movie, and it's anything but conventional. To call Skinamarink a slow burn is an understatement, to put it lightly. It makes movies like The Witch and Hereditary look like Return of the Living Dead and Chopping Mall by comparison. It lives and dies on the unrelenting dread it creates. The first third of the picture has several long moments where the audience is made to stare into the darkness. Shot digitally, and with the ISO setting apparently cranked as high as it'll go, Skinamarink is bathed in video noise. But rather than detract from the presentation, it adds to the analog horror aesthetic. The video noise also helps create the scares. As we stare into the abyss, there's no action and little sound. The only movement is the shimmer of digital grain in the dark. The longer you gaze into it, the harder your mind works to try and find something to focus on. It starts to interpret the video noise as shapes, faces, and figures that shudder into existence and vanish just as quickly. It's a neat effect, and would be disquieting enough on its own. But it becomes brilliant later in the film once the sinister happenings begin in earnest. You may find yourself unsure if what you're seeing is part of the film, or your own imagination working overtime to make sense of limited visual information. It reminds me of a technique actors have been known to use when they have to take on a particularly sinister role. What you do is you find yourself a room with a mirror where you can dim the lights, get it as dark as possible while still being able to see your reflection. Then you sit there, alone, in silence, and stare into your own eyes until you can see evil. That's what I feel like when I watch this movie. It's the cinematic equivalent of staring into the abyss and having the abyss stare right back. Few films have done more with less than Skinamarink. It lingers on negative spaces like empty doorways and blank walls, fixtures that would normally frame the subjects or actions in a shot. We spend so much time in these negative spaces that it's almost unbearable when there actually is something to look at. The kids spend a lot of the runtime watching old cartoons on TV. At first, there's something comforting about it. It's about the only non-threatening source of activity and movement in the house. I know it really tickled my nostalgia gland. Before there was the internet and streaming and such like, we had to make do with whatever was on the tube. And in 1995, when this picture takes place, weren't no Adult Swim, no FX, no Toonami, none of that. If you were lucky, you'd be able to find some old Hanna-Barbera or Fleischer Studio cartoons playing, and it's the latter that really takes me back. When I was a boy, you'd know the sun was getting ready to rise when the old Fleischer Popeye or Felix the Cat cartoons would come on. Being a movie of modest means, Skinamarink has to make do with some public domain tombs instead of them more famous characters, but the vibes are still immaculate, and they give a sense of comfort in what's otherwise a pretty stressful hang. But that comfort becomes a crutch. The idea that the security it offers could prove false or worse, be used against you, becomes its own source of anxiety. Without giving too much away, I'm not exaggerating when I say that a brief scene involving a malfunctioning VCR is the most nerve-shredding movie moment I've seen in several years. And that sense of a sort of violated comfort mixes like peanut butter and chocolate, with the palpable dread throughout the whole movie. It's the kind of dread that's difficult to explain, never mind depict in a film. In your average horror picture, the source of the anxiety is obvious. Either there's a killer lurking on the fringes of every frame, some kind of malign presence that you know is stalking our heroes, even if it's not obvious where or even who it is. Skinamarink doesn't just subvert the established formula of what a horror movie is and how they're supposed to work. It creates a fear that's utterly incomprehensible. It makes you feel like a child again, where you know something's wrong, but you don't have the frame of reference to understand what that is. Imagine we can all remember times when we were little and we'd hear the adults speaking in hushed tones about something bad happening. We wouldn't have the context to make sense of it, but it was obvious it was serious, it was freaking out the grown-ups. And the lack of our ability to understand the situation only made it more dreadful. That Skinamarink is able to recreate having that specific pit of worry and anxiety in your guts might be the movie's greatest success. Chalk the movie's efficacy up to director Kyle Edward Ball's familiarity with the subject. Prior to making his feature film debut with Skinamarink, Ball ran a YouTube channel called Bite-Sized Nightmares. He would ask viewers to comment descriptions of their nightmares, then film his own interpretations. While running the channel, he noticed recurring tropes in a lot of the comments he'd receive. Total strangers from different walks of life would report nightmares with similar trappings or themes. This inspired Ball to expand the project into a feature film. After shooting a short based on the idea as a proof of concept, Bill was able to raise $15,000 for the full feature, mostly through crowdfunding. The finished project is full of personal details. The name Skinamarink, for example, comes from a song by the same name featured in 1958's Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which Ball says was integral to his childhood. It was filmed in his childhood home in Edmonton, and shots are littered with recognizable toys that would have been common at the time. The cheap wooden paneling seen throughout the house will be nostalgic to millions of North Americans. Those details do a ton of the heavy lifting to make the experience relatable and therefore horrifying. Skinamarink made its debut on the festival circuit last summer, where it enjoyed critical praise, but it was during one of these festivals that a technical issue allowed the film to leak online. In most circumstances, this would be devastating for an independent production, but once again, Skinamarink bucked the conventional wisdom. pirated copies made their way onto YouTube soon enough, with clips getting huge traction on Reddit, Twitter, and especially on TikTok. And it took on a reputation as the kind of movie that dares you to watch it. Every generation has a few movies like that. Think of pictures like The Exorcist, like Ringu, and so on. Skinamarink looks like it's the first example of such for Gen Z. For his part, Ball was disappointed that his film was pirated before it was even officially released. But in the end, it's probably the best thing that could have happened. Were it not for the leak, Skinamarink may have just come and gone like so many other films before it. They pick up some accolades on the festival circuit before going quietly into that good night, leaving zero long-term impact. The Cannes film market alone features more than 4,000 new films every year, so if your little indie project is going to gain traction, it needs this kind of heat. So I think the leak probably did make the difference. Skinamarink was initially only guaranteed a limited theatrical run on 629 screens. That's it. But thanks to the positive buzz it's been racking up for half a year at this point, it became a surprise hit as no-budget films go. Most theaters expanded their runs, playing the film on more screens over several weeks. As of now, the little experimental horror that could has racked up just under $2 million at the box office, meaning it's made its money back well over 100-fold. But despite the critical acclaim, the commercial success, and my own fondness for the picture, I can't give Skinamarink a blanket recommendation. When my screening wrapped up, the gentleman nearest me loudly exclaimed, "Well, that was a piece of shit," as soon as the house lights came on. I obviously do not share that sentiment, but I can't exactly blame the guy either. Skinamarink ain't gonna be for everyone. And even if you are a fan of the film overall, there still might be some moments where it tries your patience. There is a reason that the cold open to this video was a snippet from Derek Jarman's Blue. I mean, at first, yeah, it was just a stupid goof on my part about the fact that Skinamarink literally has a lot of the color blue in it. But the more I sat with it, the more I kinda saw these as kindred films. Blue is a 1 hour and 19-minute film where the only visual is a static blue screen. Musical cues, atonal medleys, and bits of narration play over the unmoving sea. It's the kind of high-concept, capital A art film that you may not have seen personally, but you've almost certainly seen parodied in other stuff.
What the hell is this? Must be a cartoon. Shh. What? Must be birth. This looks like birth. I remember when I was a boy in Russia, it was biology. It was birth. Up, it's born. Whatever it is, it's born. Look out! Too late. It's dead already.
Yeah, exactly. It's the sort of thing strawman art haters rail against and strawman art snobs exalt. And Skinamarink is destined to be similarly contentious. Half of folk will be like the gentleman in my theater and loudly complain about it, and the other half will be like me and loudly fillet it. It's not the only similarity Blue and Skinamarink have, incidentally. They both have a certain preoccupation with death. Derek Jarman made Blue during the final stages of his battle with AIDS. He would pass away only 4 months after it was released. And the omnipresent field of blue that makes up the entire film was itself a depiction of Jarman's own reality. As his disease progressed, his retinas began to detach and he functionally went blind. Skinamarink doesn't have any connections with death that are quite so literal, and I don't want to spoil what little there is in the film to spoil. But suffice to say that a child's understanding of mortality and death, or rather, their lack of understanding, is a key theme. Both Blue and Skinamarink are obtuse and inaccessible, bordering on impenetrable at times. That's why even though I love both, I can't begrudge anyone for hating on either. Particularly Skinamarink. At least with Blue, you'd have to go to the Tate or the Museum of the Modern Art to see a screening. At either of those, you got an expectation of what you're getting into. By contrast, I saw Skinamarink at the AMC out by the Pollo Tropical and the Bell's Outlet. You know, it's a different vibe. For my part, this movie just scratches an itch. It's basically the movie I wanted We're All Going to the World's Fair to be. I didn't hate that film, but I did come away feeling like the marketing misrepresented it. I thought I was getting some kind of psychotronic supernatural horror film about an evil creepypasta or some such. Instead, it was just kind of a stock melodrama about terminally online, mentally unwell shut-ins, and the horror stuff was just set dressing that gets abandoned entirely about halfway through. By contrast, I think Skinamarink is very well represented by its trailer, so if you're on the fence, then give that a watch. The Bite-Sized Nightmares channel is still up too, so you can check out some of Ball's older work. If any of that piques your curiosity in the slightest, then Skinamarink is a must-see. If nothing else, you won't watch another movie like it all year. As of right now, it's up on the all-horror, all-the-time streaming service Shudder. Subscriptions are about $6 a month, which is a deal and a half for the amount of content you get. Neither Shudder nor AMC Networks paid me to say that, but it would have been cool if they had. Final thoughts? I already told you this one's gonna be real divisive, and I do not accept responsibility if this flick just pisses you off. I can only tell you my thoughts, and what my thoughts tell me is that Skinamarink ranks 4 evil toddler toys out of 5. Check it out. Hey all, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, you can give me a like, give me a follow, ring the bell, you know how that whole song and dance goes. If you didn't like what you saw, you can head on down to the comments and tell me that this movie's a bunch of bollocks and I'm an idiot for liking it. No wrong answers here. Back again next time with something a bit different. Until then, be seeing y'all around the bend.